Thank you for doing this, Azim.
Hey Srijit, how are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you feeling today?
I'm doing great. Nice weather today, so I didn't have to go outside. Stayed home.
Tell me
Oh.
about how did you travel from North America to Europe without a passport?
That's actually a clickbait. To be honest, there is this place in Iceland where the tectonic plates, these are like geographical, phenomena where the rocks underneath get separated. This happened several thousand years ago,
Okay.
and they are the starting points where two continents kind of start
Okay.
underground, and this is the only place on top of the sea level where you can actually see them like getting separated.
So how
So
how do you cross this place? Is there a bridge?
there is a bridge on top of this two rocks. Each rock, each side of the rock is basically one continent according to the geography of it. And beneath it, it's like a small river of water, and you can actually cross. So while I was there in person, the river was frozen, so you can actually cross through the river.
So what's the best time to visit Iceland?
I would say summer,
Okay.
because you won't even see the nighttime during summer of Iceland. So you have more of daytime, and you can travel as much as you want.
Were you able to see any of the northern lights?
Um, I got a quick sneak peek of the Northern Lights, but yeah, there is a dedicated place within Iceland where you can go and stay there overnight, and you see it. But I did not see them.
So is it like a hue of green in the sky at night?
Yeah, we were actually in a swimming pool. It's like
Okay.
a geothermal pool, and all of a sudden people were rushing outside of the thermal pool, and we did not know what exactly happening. And someone said that someone saw northern lights outside of the pool, and by the time we went, that streak of green lights went away.
Okay.
I only got a sneak peek of it, but again, it's kind of overrated. I've spoken with people who have seen it overnight sitting there. After 5-6 minutes into it, you don't even feel like you are actually seeing them as a crazy phenomena. But yeah,
But I guess it would be amazing to see it for the first time in your life.
first time for sure. Yes. Yeah.
So this geothermal pool, was it heated naturally?
It is heated naturally. Yes.
That's nice, man. How amazing this technology of nature is, right?
Yeah. The moment you said technology, I was gonna say it's not anything heated, but it's naturally heated. Yeah, it is actually very unique experience, to be honest. It's super cold outside, and you enter into this geothermal pool. The water is so warm, and you don't even feel like getting outside of the pool.
Nice.
Yeah, and there will be some natural clay, a white colored clay they give you to put on your face and stuff. And it's all commercialized though. Like the place where I use the geothermal pool, you have to buy a 300 euros ticket to get into the pool. It's a 300 euro ticket, so it's very
That's
expensive.
expensive.
It's very expensive. So you jump into this pool, you get some free drinks, and you see a lot of people also enjoying it. It's like super commercial, but the whole pool itself is natural.
And is it huge?
It's huge. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And is the water really hot or is it like warm?
I would say between warm to hot.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, imagine. I mean, you are in your swimsuits. It is like sub-zero temperature, and you, even if the water is warm, you feel like it's really hot. But yeah,
Okay. All right. So tell me about yourself. What do you do? What do you work on? What are your hobbies? What do you like to do in your free time?
okay, sure. My name is Azim Sheikh, as you know. I've been in the States for little over 7 years. A lot of my time I spend in front of computers. I have a computer science degree. If you ask me what exactly I do, it's going to be very hard job for me. So I do random stuff with computers. I myself like to code and build some stuff like we all use on mobile phones and websites. And I work for a financial services company. I've been with the same company for the same time I've been staying in US. My hobbies include, I used to travel a lot. before pandemic situation. I've traveled probably 7+ countries, and during my I recently started doing YouTube. I started creating educational content regarding what I do on a daily basis, mostly related software related stuff, and architecture, cloud related stuff. uh yeah, that's pretty much, I would say. Travel would be my number one hobby. If not, I would sit in front of a computer.
So, which all countries have you traveled to?
uh, I've traveled to Canada, Iceland. You within the Europe, I've traveled. Yeah, Iceland comes under Europe. But I've traveled to France, Italy. If you count Vatican as a separate country, I've traveled Vatican City as well.
Okay.
And I'm not counting the layoff airports in between. But if you also count that, I've traveled to Dubai, I've traveled to Bahrain, I've traveled to Brussels and Paris. Paris also comes under France. But yeah.
You're a great traveler, man. I love people who travel because traveling gives you a lot of new experiences that you don't get to uh, f- uh, e- that you don't get to see when you're sitting at home. So unless you get outside, it's really amazing to see how the cultures over there are, how people over there are, what do they do on the day-to-day basis. Because people, what they do in India is completely different from people what they do in their free time in the US. Or maybe I haven't traveled to Europe, but I'm guessing that during their free time too, they must be doing something really different. And it's just amazing to see how cultures have flourished over years. You know.
That is very true, because coming from India, I never thought, I'm not sure about you, I never thought traveling would be a hobby. You know, when I was in India, the best I could do living in a small town is to go for a movie, or probably go to the beach and spend some time, or go to a dhaba, eat food, and that would be our pastimes. And when I came to US, we had so much time here, and luckily I had some good travel buddies where I was last minute addition to the trips, but still I enjoyed the best traveling with them. So I've traveled many of the national parks within the country, and I've seen some of the national parks in Canada. I've seen some national parks some in Italy. And I mean, it's an amazing experience, man, to be honest with you, because you, again, like you said, you get to see a lot of new people. You get to see how they function on a daily basis, and you get to stay in those places. You get to eat new type of cuisine, and capturing those moments was something that I take away from each of my trips.
So while traveling Europe, was English the primary language, or did people speak native languages? And was it difficult to communicate?
It was actually difficult to communicate when I was in France and Italy, because we switched between these two countries in less than 2 days. I only know few, because in Europe, contrary to in United States, the domestic travel, the trains and stuff is very high. Like, you travel a lot through trains. Each time you have to know which place you are heading to, and you have to know what exactly those signs are. So early on, we realized, okay, we need to know where is the exit is, where is the entrance is. So we had to learn those two words. We had to learn how to say hi. We had to learn how to say thank you. If I remember correctly, merci, or I don't remember them now, but when I was traveling in Europe in trains, I got to know about how to say thank you, or to say, how should I go this, how should I go to this place, where is the exit, where is the entrance. So I kind of used my Google Translate when I was on the go, and scanned it and read it, and used to talk to other people. So very few words. English used to be my major language, but most people in Italy and France, although they know English, they prefer not to speak English. So you have to learn local language.
So how accurate is Google Translate?
Pretty accurate.
Pretty
Yeah,
accurate.
yeah, pretty accurate.
I've actually never used it, but sometimes I convert it from English to Marathi. it has a lot of grammatical mistakes, but I think all in all, it's a good tool if you don't know the language completely, because it almost converts it 70% accurate, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, see, when you're communicating with someone, the other person knows that that you are trying to communicate in a different language. So grammatical mistakes wouldn't be a huge deal. But if you are making an effort to speak their language, so they will come one step towards you and try to understand what you're trying to communicate. Yeah.
Right, right.
Even in India, no, I've heard this thing. People in Hyderabad, although they know Urdu, although they know local language, let's just say, Telugu is a local language there. No, they don't speak Telugu. They'll only speak Urdu.
Okay.
Let's just say you go from a Telugu speaking town to Hyderabad and start speaking Telugu to local people. Although they know Telugu, they wouldn't respond to you. They will respond to you only in Urdu.
So even if they know the language,
Even
they'll
if they know
respond.
the language, yes, yes, that's a
That
thing, and I've seen it. People doing it.
That's hilarious, because I've seen in Pune too, and even I do it sometimes. If people, if I know the other person knows how to speak Marathi, even if they ask
Why?
me
Yeah,
a
exactly.
question in English or Hindi, I'll always respond in Marathi because I
Yeah,
know they can speak it.
yeah.
But if that's not the case, then I try and communicate in the same language that the person is speaking. Yeah, so I do that.
Again, it depends upon the way how the other person is trying to communicate, whether he's being down to earth or he's being so commanding in terms of how he asks the questions or how he is asking the help. Yeah, I've seen people sharing different types of shades when they do this stuff. Yeah.
So I was going through your YouTube videos and I saw a video about Web3.
Yeah.
So can you explain us in layman terms, what exactly is Web 1, 2, and 3?
Okay, sure. That's an easy job for sure. So I'll start with Web 1. Okay. When internet started, now there used to be a plain simple web pages. Like you can't do much about, you know. When I say plain web pages, this is like 20 years ago. When you go to a website, you hardly find things to do interactivity, meaning you simply read them, probably go over and pretty much you can't do anything about other than reading those web pages.
Probably
That's
how
like the
the
web.
WordPress websites are.
Exactly. But just like Wikipedia pages, but there is nothing to click, nothing to add, nothing to type on. It's like simple web pages,
So
plain
do
pages.
they have links so that you can click on the links and go to another web page?
Maybe the maximum possible interaction is to have those links. And other than that, there wouldn't be anything in the first version of the web.
So no
Meaning you
pictures.
can't rev back, you can't write back. All that you do, you only read it. You can't
Okay.
write it back. Meaning, when I say write, the moment you type something on web now, these information is being saved somewhere behind the scenes, at least now, right? You type on your username and password, and based on the username password you get into something, and then
Right.
from there to something, right? This happened in web 2.0, meaning you not only read, you also write back into this websites, into this web. That is a transition between web 1 and web 2. Web 1 you can only read, web 2 you can actually read, at the same time you can actually write back. When this happened, all the big tech companies, they started collecting your information, put that information in databases. So this is like web 2.0, where companies like Facebook, Google, and Amazon, Microsoft, all these people started creating these billion-dollar industries, e-commerce websites, social media platforms. So this is the web 2.0 phase, which is what we are living in right now. So
So, do you think these, for example, Facebook always had a business plan that they'll collect data and you use our data to sell it to other companies, or did they always have a plan about creating a social media website, or was it later that they realized that they could actually use this data for to make money? What do you
yeah,
think?
I would say when Facebook started, the only revenue model they had is ads on their websites.
Okay.
So I remember watching a couple of Mark Zuckerberg's interviews where he says, okay, when we started Facebook, We only had one thing in mind, where we create these web pages and we have some ads in these pages. People who click on those ads are the source of revenue sources for them. Later on, when they started seeing new accounts being created in the platform, they realized, okay, let's just collect this information from people, and why don't we use it in a way where we can generate more money out of them.
Right.
So yeah.
Who would have thought that we would one day, by using this website, would be a product for the company?
Yeah,
And
obviously we're all products. If we are not creating content, and if we are not taking advantage of these platforms, someone is actually taking advantage of our time. That's how I see it. Each
Yeah,
time
but
when I scroll on YouTube or Facebook, if I'm not making money, someone is making money out of my time. That's how I see it.
yeah, but these companies are so smart that even if you create content, they'll put advertisements on your videos and make money off of your content.
That is true. That is true. Do you know, even if you don't have Facebook account or Google account or any kind of social media platforms, they will still have your information with them, and they will still try to collect your information and create a persona of, let's just say, Srijit.
Like a
Even if you don't have
virtual me.
exactly, even if you don't have any accounts with
So
them.
how do they get that information?
I mean, each website that you obviously they don't have Srijit as a an entity,
Okay.
but they will have a rough entity where all the browsers that you browse, all the websites that you go, these websites actually feed information to Facebook. These websites actually feed information to Google. They don't have Srijit as a person, but they have an entity which has a likes and dislikes of Srijit or
So
Azim.
so how do they create this entity? Do they track the IP address of for example, my place, and they see what all I web search through my IP address, and that's how they create a virtual me?
IPs, the websites that you browse share that information to Facebook.
Okay.
So you don't have to share directly to Facebook. The websites that you browse will share that information to
Okay.
Facebook. And you can actually find out what are all the websites sharing your information to Facebook.
So even if I don't share my cookies, they still get all my information?
Yeah. Even
So
if you delete your cookies every day, they will still collect your information. They will still share that information to Facebook or Google or any social media platform. It is insane if you
then
look at it.
accepting the cookies is bullshit, because even if
Exactly.
you accept it or you don't accept it, your information is still used by them or
Exactly.
saved by them.
Yes.
So
100%.
so in web 1, all they did was had web pages and you could just see information but could not respond to it. What happens in web 2?
Yeah. In web 2, like I said, you write back to internet.
Okay.
You write back to websites, meaning you type out, you create those credentials. Even a single search you do on a website, everything will be captured behind the scenes.
Okay.
This captured information will be used to create better experiences for you as a user, and also this data will be used like ad machines or AdSense machines to third party vendors, where they can put their ads on top of your social media profiles. So that is what the entire web 2 runs with. If they cannot save the data, the whole interaction between user and the business cannot happen. It's web 2 basically solving two problems. Once the user problem, the user wants to find out what restaurant close to him or her, and the business wants to sell their products to users. So web 2 is solving the user's problem and the business problem together.
Yeah, but sometimes I feel amazing when my data is not saved. For example, if I log on to somebody else's Netflix, or if I'm at somebody else's house, and if I see some different recommendations, it's really amazing to see different recommendations. Otherwise, they try and control you and feed you all the same YouTube videos that you've watched. I'm a person who likes to see something different every time, and this is a disadvantage for me, because if they create a virtual me, they're always going to show me the same kind of videos, or suggest same genre of movies, so it doesn't give me random shit.
So you're saying you're okay people tracking you and giving you better information and better search results?
I
You're okay
mean,
with that?
uh, I'm not okay per se, but I don't have an option, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the second one sounds good. Yeah, even if you try so hard, they still get your data. So why not give my data and get better results?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And how about Web3?
Okay, Web3 comes when you really want to take advantage of your information, right?
Okay.
Obviously you might ask me a question. Okay, I have access to my profiles. I can take down and I can take down whenever I want. Similarly, what happens? Let's just say you have a YouTube channel, you have a Facebook account, you have millions of followers and millions of subscribers, and all of a sudden Facebook or YouTube decides to take them down for some kind of reasons. Let's just say
Like
you violated,
deplatform you for violating
yeah,
their.
violating whatever the reasons. You all of a sudden your entire digital life has gone,
Okay.
right? That is exactly the problem Web3 solves. Okay, again, I cannot say it's a problem. I can say you will have the centralized authority rather than someone else showing their authority on your social media profiles. Plus, each time when you share pictures or making videos, unless you are monetizing them, you are not the one who is benefiting out of it. They are the ones who are benefiting out of it. So with Web3, right, each time when you put your content on their platforms, on Web3 related platforms, you will have some kind of control over who can use this information, how much of advantage that you can take out of this content, and when can you take your content down, when can you have your content up. Meaning you have some kind of ownership of your information on Web3, and that is the isolated advantage of Web3 versus Web2. Meaning, if you want me to get more technical into it, you can actually write smart contracts on Web3 and say each time when this content of yours is being viewed by someone or being sold to someone, you get a cut, you get some portion of that revenue to you. So that way you can have a control over who's selling your data. Let's just say, Shutterstock, and there are some websites where free photographs or free videos are being sold, right? I can today take your information, put it on Shutterstock and sell it. In
Right.
Web3, I cannot do that because let's just say Shutterstock is built on Web3 platform. It will only allow it is if it is created by you, because it's all built on top of a blockchain platform. No third person can actually pirate your information and put it in the blockchain, because that new platform will have to validate that I am Srijit. Then only it will accept my content into their platform. We haven't seen even the tip of the iceberg yet. It's still in the talks. People just started realizing the potential of Web3. It might soon revolutionize, or it might soon completely vanish out of the tech space. But I'm rooting for that to happen.
But my question is that you don't directly give consent to some company to use your data. How they take consent from you is they write these long what do you call it, information pages, and you have to accept all of the terms and conditions, and that's
Yes.
how they get access to your data, right?
Yeah.
What if they do the same thing on Web3?
Uh, it, and the concept of Web3 is more of a decentralized, meaning one person cannot, you as a person cannot dictate everything, or the platform which develops, uh, which develops the company. Let's just say an imaginary company comes up and develops a platform for you and me to share their content, right? That platform is still on blockchain, which is
Okay.
decentralized, where they themselves do not have full authority on what is going to happen on that platform. It is decentralized. Everyone should have some kind of consensus on what to happen on the platform.
So all of the companies that exist on Web 2 can still exist on Web 3 with a condition that whenever they use your data, they'll have to pay you in some way.
Yeah, they can still exist, but their revenue models will completely change, and they
S-
will relatively earn less than what they are earning in Web 2.0.
So what do you think? What will they come up with?
I mean, they might come up with ways always to take advantage of it,
Right.
and we just have to wait and see how they will do it. Yeah, it's crazy right now, and what's happening in this Web3 area where people are literally resigning their jobs, spending their time into creating platforms in Web3. I've seen so many people on my LinkedIn. Yeah.
It's so crazy because metaverse is a part of Web3, right?
Yes, metaverse is possible because of Web3. Let's put that way.
I was reading an article the other day that one of the companies bought $1 million land
Okay.
in metaverse. I'm like,
Yeah.
it's so crazy for me to understand how this thing virtually, physically doesn't exist, just exists virtually, or an imaginary aspect of the internet,
Yeah.
and people are investing millions of dollars to buy properties, to buy NFTs. It just blows my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way things are going as of now, we care more on how we look on our digital platforms rather than how we look in real,
Okay.
right? So you and I don't post any random picture on Instagram or Facebook. We pick what is best on Instagram, right?
Right.
Similarly, as we continue to do so, we 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 f- we do things which are more appropriate for a digital life rather than what the real life. So the expectation here is going forward, people will migrate from using their mobile phones to these devices where they hang on to their
The
these
virtual
virtual
reality.
reality devices, and they simply attend meetings, travel across the globe, do all kinds of stuff within this virtual reality world. And each time when they spend there, they have to have some kind of assets to show off to other people. You and I can randomly upload an image into those platforms, but since this meta world is kind of built on top of blockchain, you have to have some kind of authority on the asset, let's just say these NFTs, to be to upload on those platforms. If you don't have the ownership of those NFTs, you cannot upload them. And if you cannot upload them, you cannot show off that you are the owner of those platforms.
It,
If
yeah,
Yeah.
it's so crazy because a few days ago there was some celebrity who hosted a concert. I forgot who. But you had to give up some of your NFTs to get access to their concerts, which is okay because that's like a trading token that you exchange to get into the concert. But I would have thought that if you get into the concert, you will be able to see the person right in front of you, right? Because it's virtual reality. But it all depends on how expensive your how worthy your token is as compared to their fees to get into the concert. For example, if say your NFT is worth $100, you'll probably get a front seat, and if your NFT is worth $10, you'll get a seat at the back. And that's how you attend concert in virtual reality too, because you'll see other people sitting in front of you if you don't get the front seating.
Yeah, if you make things exclusive, right? Like you said, why would someone want to attend a concert virtually when they cannot feel the real authenticity of attending a concert? If you make this concert exclusive in a virtual reality world, then people will slowly start attending these concerts. Who would imagine, in 2020 or 2019, that everything runs on Zoom calls,
Right.
right? I remember back in days, I cannot name them, but turning someone asking you to turn on your video will sounds really offensive
Right.
in 2018, 15, 16 probably. Now,
Pre-pandemic.
pre-pandemic. And now if we don't turn on ourselves, we feel ourselves that we are not included into the meeting. We are
Right.
not included. We are not, we're kind of excluded if we don't turn on into the meeting. It's like a major shift I mean, just in 3-4 years, this major shift has happened, and this metaverse or the virtual reality concerts is more of a futuristic, where the adoption of this virtual gadgets, become more regular to normal people. Then only this kind of things happen on a regular basis for all the people.
So, going back to your statement of those smart contracts that you can write to make money,
Yeah.
so is it going to be very difficult for a non-programmer or person who doesn't have enough knowledge about programming coding to write these contracts, or is it going to be how you sign PDFs right now that they are auto-generated contracts and you can just docu-sign the
Yeah.
PDFs?
Yeah, those I mean, just like how we are booking tickets, how we are ordering food, how we are ordering Uber. These are all the things that you and I cannot do today, right? I cannot write a program where I can simply order food on DoorDash.
Right.
So companies are building platforms for you. Companies are building platforms in such a way that we don't have to worry about the tech part of it. We just have to do the user part of it, meaning we just put the numbers there, hit enter, that's it. Behind the scenes, the platform will take care of it. So yeah, a lot of new early adopters in this industry, Web3, are building those platforms for us, so we don't have to do that.
So
And you have
what is going to happen um, to people who constantly keep on sitting at home and are a part of a virtual reality in their life? And what about fitness related to this?
I think if you look at quests, Facebook, Oculus Rift, Quest 2, right? There are some games where you have those consoles in hand. I mean, for you to be fit, you don't have to use those gadgets. But if you are someone who is using those gadgets, and if you still want to be conscious on your fitness, there are some games where you can use them, where you can play tennis. I think why
Like a HIIT workout, hit workout.
exactly. And there are, I think I've seen some Star Wars related game where you have to break some things with your two of your swords. And yeah, there are some stuff, but that's like overkill. And
Okay.
you can still walk outside and do stuff. But if you're in a situation, uncompromised situation, where you can't work out but you need motivation, I would definitely do it. It gamifies the experience.
Right.
you know if your workout is gamified, you tend to be more interested in it. If it's not gamified, it's like, okay, I've done 30 minutes, let's just go crash and watch some TV show.
I still remember the day when I got internet for the first time at my house, and it was a dial-up connection where
You get that
it,
you get
yeah,
that sound, yeah.
it you get the sound, and you can either use the your landline or you can use your internet
One at a time, yeah.
one at a time. And back in those days, not many people had cell phones, so your main line of connectivity was your landline. And if
That's
you're
true.
searching anything on the internet and somebody calls you on your phone, like your landline, you just have to disconnect to it. And even the the pace at which the page is loaded on those website on dial-up connections, it was so slow. And back and now looking ahead, like 10 years from then, and now we're talking about virtual reality.
Yeah, yeah. How old were you when you first experienced the internet?
The dial-up, I think I was in 7th standard.
Yeah, I was in sixth. Yeah, we are about the same age. Yeah, when we first saw the internet, it was crazy. I think I remember when the computer guy who installed computer on our at our home, he's the one who set up the internet. And the first page, I remember there was this one movie back then, and they had this web page. And that page, and the moment he typed that URL in the web page, the page took probably 10 minutes to load the first page of it. I still remember that exactly what happened that day. So yeah, internet completely changed, and I strongly believe that virtual reality will also be a part of our lives.
And not many people had computers or internet at their house, so what I had to do was go to an internet cafe or something.
Yeah,
And I still remember it was like 20 rupees for an hour.
for an hour. Yeah,
And they had some kind of weird system in which as soon as the clock hit 60 seconds, they would disconnect you
the
from
internet.
wherever you
Wow.
are.
Wow.
And I remember having Orkut account at that time, and I used to go to this internet cafe once a week to check all my messages and all. Um, and now everybody has a cell phone. Everybody has immediate access to internet. It's so amazing. So
Have
if the world has gone from there to here, I don't think it's going to take any time for us to for humanity to go from here
here to there.
into
Yeah,
virtual
that's
reality.
true. Yeah, I strongly believe that. I mean, just look at your phone. How much time you spend on phone on a typical day? I can't tell my numbers. I hate to see that and realize how much time I'm spending on a phone. I can't tell those numbers.
Especially after the new Apple updates have how much time you spent on each app.
Exactly.
It's so weird to see how how much invested you are in your phone. And the documentary that I saw,
Social dilemma.
Social Dilemma, they talk about how these big tech companies are fighting to gain your time. Like the more time you
Yeah,
spend on their
exactly.
website,
Time is money.
time is money. Exactly.
Yeah. If you are not earning money on these platforms, someone else is earning, and you are their product. Your time is their product. I think that's the gist of that show.
So, how does blockchain work? Do they have servers like how Google has data centers? Do they have servers like that? Or I have heard that all these Bitcoin miners have huge servers in their houses, and they save people's information on their servers, and the company pays them gas fees. Is that right?
Yeah. So you talked about Google. You talked about blockchain. So let me first touch little bit on Google, or in matter of fact, any big company, right? Uh, all big companies have their own data centers, meaning they have their own huge compute machines in their data centers, and whatever we provide them as data will be saved in those data centers. The complete opposite of blockchain is, in blockchain is, there is no one particular authority which will have hold of all the data center. I mean, all the compute power. Today, if I plug in my computer, I have a couple of Raspberries, I have a laptop, or I have a powerful machine. I plug my machine to the blockchain network. Technically, my computer will also act as a mini data center in the blockchain. Meaning, you as Srijit, if you create some kind of information in a platform which is built on top of blockchain, part of your data will also be saved in my machine. When I say in my machine, I will not have access to that information. Only you will have. It's just like BitTorrent.
Okay.
Back in days we used to download things on torrents, right?
Right.
It used to get seeds from all the machines which are connected in the torrent, in the BitTorrent network, and gets those seeds from each of them.
Right.
The more number of nodes in the network, the more fast you used to download those content from the torrents. Similar concepts in blockchain. So you, in order to be a part of in the blockchain, you have to become a node in the blockchain. And once you become a node in the blockchain, you will technically become a tiny part of a data center in the blockchain.
Okay. So I see that most of the other fees are eliminated. So are they going to pay you if they use part of your machine as their servers?
If I'm not a node in a blockchain, meaning if I'm not providing any compute to the blockchain, I have to pay the gas fee, meaning you as Srijit has provided some kind of compute to the blockchain, so I pay you some gas fee. If I have my own node attached to the blockchain, I don't have to pay any gas fees because I am providing some compute power to the blockchain. So there are two ways to it. If I don't want to pay gas fees, I'll just have to create my own node to the blockchain so that I don't have to pay gas fee. Again, this is more generic. There are several different types of blockchains in the market. Each blockchain has different types of protocols in terms of how these gas fees work. I'm generalizing it to most of the blockchains.
And then how do you pay these gas fees?
Um,
Like in what form? Is it all cryptocurrencies? Is it NFTs
yeah,
or what is it
yeah.
exactly?
When I say blockchain, right? Ethereum has one. Ethereum sits on one type of blockchain. Bitcoin is on one type of blockchain. So each I mean the market term for these is project. Okay, each project will have their own cryptocurrency. For you to be a part of that project, or for you to be a part of that blockchain, you should hold or you should earn some kind of cryptocurrency, right? The gas fees that you talked about can be translated into that type of cryptocurrency. Meaning, I'll give you a simple example. If if I don't have any compute power that I'm giving to the blockchain, Srijit, you as a node in the blockchain is providing some kind of compute. I pay you as some kind of cryptocurrency to you.
Okay.
So that's how you start generating. That's called mining.
Okay.
That's how you start mining some kind of cryptocurrency. Once you collect them, you can trade them with other people. That's how the cryptocurrency thing starts.
But how does this the value of a cryptocurrency keep on changing? Say for example, you if you consider a US dollar,
Okay.
its value for a year keeps on over the years keeps on fluctuating, but the fluctuation is almost, you can say, it's stable. Like it'll hardly fluctuate 1 to 2%. I don't even know, probably not even 1 to 2%, even less over the years. But you see every day that the Bitcoin price is up or the Bitcoin price is down. So how can you trust these cryptocurrencies that they will hold value after few years?
Yeah, there is no good answer to this, Sridhar, because uh, when companies like Coinbase and pretty much all the cryptocurrency retail companies, meaning I simply use my US dollars to purchase some cryptocurrencies, when these folks came into picture, the the way how the value of each of these cryptocurrencies fluctuated is unimaginable. You can't even predict. There is no such machine learning algorithm or no such platform which can predict this the price of these cryptocurrencies. Now if you ask me why are they fluctuating, there are so many theories on how these things are fluctuating. Some people say they simply pump, make other people invest in it, and when the value of that cryptocurrency is going up, they will simply take away and dump other people there.
Doge to the moon.
Yeah, exactly, Doge to the moon. And yeah, I mean there is no one solid answer on why these cryptocurrencies are fluctuating like crazy. And I've seen going them pretty bad. I mean, I've invested some stuff on cryptocurrency, um, and I've seen going negative, and I've seen going like quadrupled or 10 times more than what I've invested. So there is, yeah, I cannot answer that question. I have no
Yeah,
answers to
it's
that
so
question.
like you understand most of the concepts because day and night you are working within the computer field. Say you're doing coding or you're doing something related to blockchain, or at least you are researching. But what happens to a common person who doesn't have a lot of knowledge understanding these concepts? How can they be involved into this metaverse or blockchain or buying or selling NFTs, cryptocurrencies? Like, what is your advice? Do they just go and buy cryptocurrencies or go and buy NFTs, or how can they introduce themselves into this
My
virtual world?
my advice would be, first put some time, try to understand what exactly happening in the industry rather than putting money into it. Learn what's happening in the industry, like what is Coinbase, what is Ethereum, what is Bitcoin. Start from there. And once you get some understanding of what these are, then try to understand what are the platforms that are trying to help you buy these cryptocurrencies. Meaning, what is Coinbase, what is it doing, what happens when you put $100 into Coinbase. How is Coinbase converting your money into something? You don't have to be technical to understand this. Once you get a good hold of the basic understanding of this, you can start playing around with very minimal amount, disposable amount, I would say. where you are okay losing them.
Okay.
Okay. And I mean, again, I'm not a proponent or an opponent of buying cryptocurrency. It's just I see value in it. You might not see value in it. You only invest when you see some value in it. That's how I see
Right.
it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's just so difficult that, people who literally don't know about anything might just miss the wave, because if this really comes into picture and people start using on a day-to-day basis, people who've already made a head start will have a phenomenal advantage at this point, rather than people who completely don't know about it.
It is common in any field at any point of time. Early adopters are the ones who sees the potential in any technology, and people who catch up towards the end of it are the ones who take less advantage of it. It is going to happen for cryptocurrency. It is going to happen for any industry, right?
Okay.
So it is inevitable for a typical human being to catch up everything.
Right.
So as long as you are constantly keeping an eye on what's happening in the market, and if you read, understand stuff in the market, and if you invest in the market, then you will get into it. If not, you're not losing it, but you have missed some opportunities. That's it.
Yeah, I'm just thinking all of these most of these businesses after pandemic have gone virtual, like work from home. But there are still some businesses that can never integrate into metaverse. Say, for example, what about these physical shops? Do people stop using these physical shops? What about infrastructures like hospitals? Even if you go into metaverse, you're going to
Still
need to
going
go
to go to
to
hospital.
hospitals. So the construction industry or the transportation industry, even if the whole world goes into metaverse, these industries will have to exist, right?
Yeah, obviously the common sense part kicks in when, like you just said, medical care can never happen through. Obviously, a verbal medical care can happen if someone wants to operate on you. We are not there yet. I
Yeah.
don't think someone can operate you virtually on your body, right? Like any kind of surgical procedures, you have to go there. Similar to the construction field, like you can't construct something where people live free in reality. Yeah, there is this classification, obviously, where things that can go in virtual reality, things that cannot go in virtual reality. When you talked about shops where people buy, slowly these brick and mortar shop will slowly vanish, because everything will become online. And all these online platforms, let's just say Amazon, or let's just say I start my own online company, right? I sell some kind of watches or phone screens, that's stuff like that. I can still have my store set up on virtual reality world, and people are spending time in this virtual reality world. I can have a hoarding in front of my store saying, hey, come buy here. Although they buy stuff on virtual reality, I will still deliver that product in real world. So
Right.
I have some friends working in Facebook, especially in the meta world, and I've had this conversation with them, and they explained in such a way that you will still have all your real world stuff, but you have a presence of your virtual reality, your real world stuff in virtual reality, where you convert their time in virtual reality into your business in real world. So the moment you tap on a hoarding on a virtual reality, that will redirect to an online store, and that online store will let buy customers from your store, and that eventually you are the one who gets some kind of business there in virtual reality. You see what I'm saying, right?
So when you were speaking with your friend, did you come across any of the concept that was out of the world, like that amazed you?
uh, it did not amaze me, but again, they all boil down to one question: how can companies take benefit of your time in a new platform? I'm looking at a sports game in a virtual reality game, right? And the background is an ad placed by my friend's store.
Okay.
Let's just say, right? I realize this is my friend's store. I'm gonna click on that ad in virtual reality world. I'm gonna buy it. you as another person watching the same show will have a different ad there, and you are going to do some kind of business there. Everything eventually that business will translate into a real world monetary transaction.
Right.
If that transaction happens, Facebook takes some cut.
Okay.
You as a business owner will get some cut. It's all boiled down to how that time is translated into a commercial transaction. And this is the basic concept of metaverse, to be honest with you.
So yeah, I mean, for a non-computer person to understand these concepts, it's a bit difficult. But I think eventually you'll have to get used to these concepts if you have to be current with whatever is happening around you. Otherwise, I think you're just going to miss out on the wave.
Yeah, I mean, in many cases, you don't even have to understand. You just have to go with the flow. As an
Right.
end user, I mean, us being in the industry, us knowing some kind of technology, it's okay for us to learn, but it's not required for everyone to understand. Companies will build things for you in such a way you don't even have to understand. You just have to open it, use it, and help them make money. That's
Okay.
how they are going to make simple for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So another video that I saw on your YouTube page was the Papa John's digital marketing analysis. What was your outcome? How did you do the analysis?
So that was a part of my MBA project. So we
Okay.
were working on a use case, helping. I don't remember exactly what was the outcome. It's been a while, but we the task is to understand what exactly Papa John's is doing in the market to gain. Papa John's is like third or fourth in the pizza business in the country, and our study is to understand what they are doing, what other people were doing in the same industry, and how Papa John's can do beat others in the industry and become second or third in the market. So we simply went into their social media platforms, tried to see, tried to understand what other pizza companies are doing in terms of marketing campaigns. Came up with different unique marketing campaigns that might help Papa John's. We submitted it. I'm not sure if Papa John's has implemented it. We presented it to Papa John's. They were impressed with it. And yeah, again, Papa John's is $1 billion company, so they might have their own due diligence internally to see if that strategy works with them or not. Yeah.
So while you're doing your still studying for your MBA course, what are you major like? What is your concentration into?
So my concentration is entrepreneurship
Okay.
and digital marketing.
So how so far how's the course? Is it helping you, or are you getting to learn something new?
Yeah, the best part of my MBA program is getting to learn from the other members of the MBA. I mean, obviously, you have conventional classes, you have books, you have articles that you read through, but talking to people who are in the different stages of their careers, meaning I have people from Facebook, I have people from Apple, who are senior managers who are in the industry for the last 20, 30 years. So these people are my peers in the MBA program. So the best part is to learn from them rather than learning from the course itself. So they will share their experiences on how they handled this problem. And obviously, as the younger, being an younger side of the younger side of the house in the program, I will share my own the millennial talk to them. They will share their own boomer talk to me, and we will learn from each other. So yeah, the network building part is the one that I'm going to take away with the program.
It's amazing to see when these experienced people uh, actually join these programs, and you get to learn a lot from the practical world rather than just conceptual techniques, right?
That's true. Yeah.
What was your experience doing masters in the United States?
It's a completely cultural cultural shock, cultural shift, because I came to US with a blank slate. I had no idea, although I studied computer science, I had no idea how the industry works. I had no idea how careers will look like in computer science industry. And whatever the stuff that I learned is more of theoretical, although computer science is supposed to be hands-on degree. uh, I've not done anything in India. I had no internship experience. All that I know is a theoretical knowledge. But when I came to US, when I started doing my masters in computer science, everything is different. The way classes are taught is different. The way how professors treat students is different. The way you get to do your homeworks is different. And yeah, I really enjoyed it because the way how things move here, although initially it was like a culture shock to me, I enjoyed it. I've learned a lot. I've had a good network while I was in college. I attended a lot of hackathons. I went to several different Ivy League universities to do hackathon projects, built great network. Yeah, overall experience was amazing. I don't think I would ever get this kind of experience if I did my masters in India, to be honest with you.
So at these hackathon events, do they give you an idea of a program and you have to build it? Like, how do the hackathons work?
So the way hackathons work, they actually don't give an idea on how to build. They will give you a problem.
Okay.
So you are given like 36 or 48 hours time to solve that problem. Doesn't matter how you solve it, doesn't matter with whom you solve it, doesn't matter what kind of ways, tools, platforms, technology you use to solve that platform. You have to solve that platform. Similarly, there are other people, other teams within the hackathon who are also solving the problem. The best solution will win the hackathon, and this happens in 36 hours. How crazy is it?
It is crazy.
Yeah. So when you go to these events, you run into completely strange people, as in you've no idea where they came from. You've no idea how much talented they are. You have no idea what stuff that they know. And all of a sudden you form teams, you discuss ideas, you plan it, you build it, you deploy it, and you showcase it. So when I say showcase it, you demo it to judges. And when I say judges, these are the people who are well established in top-notch companies like Google and Facebook and Microsoft. You name it. And forget about the prizes you get. Sometimes you get offered in these companies, like positions. Sometimes you get campus tours in these companies. So these, I was not really interested in the prizes. I was really interested into check out these universities, like how their infrastructure looks like, how their departments look like. And each time when I go to these universities, I'm like, okay, this university is amazing. And I used to go, who is the best alumni from this university? I remember there was this one time I was in University of Michigan to do a hackathon. Then I realized the founders of Google are from University of Michigan. And there was this one.
Are they from the Michigan University?
Yeah, they did undergrad. I think one of them did undergrad in University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. And I was in University of Pennsylvania. And Wharton School of Business is one of the top MBA schools, and almost like top-notch CEOs in the country they did their MBAs in Wharton School of Business. So it gives you that extra push when you go to these colleges and come back. And I remember each time when I go to these hackathons, came back home, I used to have that drive for next 2-3 months. When I say drive, that extra motivation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, it was amazing experiences.
Yeah, exposure is important. The when you were talking about cultural shock, how the universities in India versus the universities in the US, probably the biggest culture shock for me was this one time I was sitting in a lecture, and this one guy walks in. He has his headphones on. He's sipping coffee.
Yep.
Entering in the middle of the lecture on his phone and one foot on the table. I'm like, this never happens in India, and
Yeah.
this will never ever happen
I mean,
in the next 10 years. Probably it might happen after that.
I don't think it will never happen. I mean, who would listen to music in class, or who would have a coffee cup in his or her hand in the classroom, and who would hold a cell phone in the classroom? I mean, if that was the situation in India, my professor would have snatched my phone, broken into pieces right there and then.
I remember this one time I spilled coffee into the keyboard. It was so embarrassing for me. I stopped carrying coffee into lectures from then.
Yeah. 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 I see education, especially in the classroom. I know there is a debate on how educational system here, but education in the classroom in US is student friendly. Education in the classroom in India is teacher or university or professor friendly. So they don't really care about what student thinks. They only care about what their grade is.
It's amazing that you can select a course like you within say for an undergrad, within those 4 years you have to finish all the courses, but you have the liberty to select how many ever courses you want
Yep.
and whenever you want. Like you can either select it in the first semester or the seventh or whichever semester you
Yep.
want.
Yeah,
And
that's cool, right? I mean, you don't have to have the pressure of taking this course in this semester. You can, if you think that you have leisure time, you can take this course now. If you think you don't have leisure time, you can take that course towards the end of the semester or another year, another no semester. That
right,
never happened in India. You have to like pick something, whatever picked by the professors or the management, and go with them.
the other thing I like about the universities in the US is that even if you decide to change your major, it's easy.
Yeah.
Like I know I had a colleague who was doing architecture. 2 years into his course, he decided he wanted to go into construction management, and it was easy for him to change. But at least you can say architecture and construction are similar fields because both of them, one of them designs and one of them builds. But even if I know people who've changed from physics to construction management, which is like two opposite ends of the earth, and they've changed their major and still doing great at whatever they're doing.
Yeah, I've known someone who started medicine and moved to computer science.
It's amazing. Uh, Tell us something about Nellore.
Okay, it's a very good question and probably the best question you've asked. Nellore is a small town, small town down south in state called Andhra Pradesh. And the best way to help someone find out Nellore is to find what is the satellite launching station in India. So Nellore is the only place in India where we have, with a lot of pride, I'm saying this, we are the only place in India where we have satellite launching station. So Satish Dhawan Space Research Center, which is in Nellore, Sriharikota. Sriharikota is a small town in Nellore, and although I've never seen any of those satellite launching station,
In
very
person.
close, I always say that I've seen it, just
Okay.
because I wanted to make a point that I live in a place where the only thing we have is a satellite launching station. It's a very small town, um, probably smaller than most of the towns. And yeah, I've often seen people coming from Nellore boast themselves that their town is better than other towns just for the sake of fun.
How was your childhood like? When did you decide that you wanted to do a career into computers?
Okay, so this is a good question. I started my undergrad. Plus, if you see +1, +2 as undergrad, I started that keeping. I know we have this intermediate first year and second year, right?
Okay.
I started. I started BIPC. I'm not sure if you are aware of what BIPC is. You know what BIPC is?
No.
Botany, physics, chemistry.
PCM.
Yeah, yeah. If
We
you want to get into medicine or
yeah
anything
we
related to
in
biology,
if it's engineering related we do PCM. If it's biology related we do biology and physics,
exactly.
chemistry,
Yeah, I
maths, and
started. I started with the biology in mind. I wanted to become a doctor. At least my parents wanted me to become a doctor. I started with that in mind. After two years into it, I think in the second year or probably just after first year, my brother came to US, and I've seen him posting stuff on Orkut and Facebook. I realized, okay, looks like this guy's having a lot of fun. And I've known, I know the fact that doing medicine in India will not land me land me anywhere close to what my brother is doing. Okay, meaning it takes forever to complete medicine. I know for the fact all of my friends who are doing medicine right now are still in college, figuring out how to do with their life. So I realized, okay, I should change my majors, and I started learning math, and I moved into engineering. And right after my engineering, I did my GRE and TOEFL and came to US to do my master's in computer science.
So, looking back at yourself 10 years from now and looking at you right now, do you think what do you think about yourself?
What do I think about myself?
Did you ever imagine you would be at this point?
Wow, that's a good question. I wanted to have a good life for sure. Obviously, I always focused on studies. That doesn't mean that my life would be in a better shape. But I never imagined I would be in a situation where I live in Ohio, or I live in, matter of fact, in United States, have a career in here, have things figured out early in the life. But I'm happy where I am today. I'm happy how things are shaping out. I don't think I don't have any regrets in terms of why I made choices to become a person what I am today. Like,
Okay.
I always think, did I make a mistake of switching from medicine to engineering? Would my life be better if I were staying in medicine? I would say no. My life would be different, probably miserable, at least from experiences of my friends who are in the medical industry and the way how people are treating medical professionals. I think I made right decisions in the right time, and I moved here. That I'm happy with that.
So, what message would you like to give to students in India students or people in India who would like to come to the US?
I think students now in India have more, probably better knowledge than I do right now in US. If there is any suggestion that I would get, I'll probably get suggestions from them rather than me giving suggestions. I mean, the way India is shaping out right now with digital revolution, the way how people are creating stuff, the way how people are learning stuff. YouTube was not a thing back then, right? Everyone are learning from YouTube. Everyone are doing stuff on YouTube. Everyone are making things, starting up their own startups. I would take suggestions from them rather than me giving suggestions to them. And they
Right.
already know how to figure out things to come to US. Matter of fact, they already know things how to get to any place in the world. I mean, US was a thing. It was a thing back, at least during my parents' generation. Going to US or going to European countries is like a huge deal. I don't think it's a huge deal anymore.
Right.
Yeah. So why would you come to US when you can do magics, when you can do wonders in India itself?
Right.
Yeah, that's how I see it.
Well, thank you for doing this, man. It was amazing talking to you. We're going to do this again with some different topics, and I would like to know your views on those too. If people have to reach out to you, how can they connect with you?
Thank you so much, first of all, for having me. I know I talk a lot, although my English is not as great as yours. I sometimes run short of words. Yeah,
I
I
don't
really
consider
enjoyed the
my
show.
English the best, but thank you.
But yeah, I enjoyed a lot thinking about answering your questions. I had to go into my memory lane to come up with answers, but I enjoyed a lot talking to you. Yeah, if people want to reach out to me, I have my LinkedIn, and I also have a YouTube channel. So please reach out to me, comment, share, subscribe. Also
I-
follow me on LinkedIn.
I'll post it in my show notes.
Yes, follow me on LinkedIn. And if you have any questions on anything related to technology, anything related to travel, feel free to hit me up. I'll do my best answering your questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir.